Thanks for tuning in to Talking Point today. I'm your host, Niraj Shah, and the talking point today is technolution. It's a term that I just recently picked up. You've probably been in one or are likely to be in one in a big way in not so distant a future. The question is, can and will Indian IT be a critical participant of the same, or will it only get the froth and not the cream? Let's get Manoj Bhat of Tech Mahindra to try and crystal ball gaze this for us. Manoj, good having you. Thanks so much for joining in. Hope all is safe with you and team.
Everything is good. Everything is good. Thank you for having me on the show. I think clearly it's these are difficult times, and I think we are all trying to be safe and operating in the best manner possible.
Yeah, we sure all are. Now, can we start, Manoj, by checking with you if Indian tech in some way will benefit, participate directly, indirectly in this whole stranglehold of sorts that the big tech in the US seems to be having? Because usage is up, their dominance is up, their areas of operations are expanding. What happens for Indian tech?
So I think in a lot of ways, with the current situation, I think this whole initiative towards going digital, I think broadly that's playing out in a very big manner. So if you look at whether it is any of the tech giants you're mentioning, I think two or three big themes, right? So one is, of course, the whole e-commerce phenomena has taken off in a big way. Secondly, from a work from home perspective, I think we are seeing a lot of changes coming through in viewing habits, and that's causing some of the tech giants to benefit. The second thing which is happening is that I think from a telecom perspective, I think demand for data bandwidth and usage of that has gone up significantly. And lastly, I think if you look at our customers, I think pretty much cloud is here to stay, and we are seeing a very big acceleration in cloud adoption. So, and if I look at each of these areas, right? So I think Indian tech plays a big role. So if you take around the whole network bandwidth on that area, I think 5G is something which has been talked about. Of course, in the near term, there are some changes happening because of the current situation around lockdown and so on and so forth. But from a longer term perspective, I think bandwidth is going to be more and more in demand as consumers demand a better experience. So that's number one. Number two, I talked about the cloud adoption, and on the enterprise side, I think we are seeing a massive uptick in interest in terms of people wanting to move to the cloud, in terms of scalability, in terms of making sure that they can give a uniform experience to their employees. And lastly, I think the other important thing is customer experience. I think in a remote context, how do you give the best customer experience? And that's why we are seeing not only the conventional, the tech, the digital native kind of industries moving, but also the conventional industries trying to figure out their digital strategies in a manner that they can connect to their consumers better. And all of these trends actually help Indian IT quite a bit. And I think this is a very positive sign in the long term for Indian IT.
Okay. Could we dwell on that a bit? I mean, first, the surge in the use of apps and platforms. I think there's a note which said that we're looking at this moving up even more. Now, does it lead to some driving of higher technological spends across the value chain, and which part of the value chain would companies like yours, for example, fit in when it comes to this particular piece?
So if you look at two or three cuts of that, right? So if I look at the infrastructure layer first,
Hmm.
right? So I think we are seeing cloud adoption and go up in a big way in that layer. And that means that migration to cloud, orchestration of the cloud, and making sure that the performance is uniform. So that's one layer, which I think companies like us participate in. We help our clients migrate. In fact, if you look at the last year, some of the larger deals we did, I think they had a big component of this cloud migration, cloud orchestration. So that's number one. And number two, I touched upon is that there is always been initiative towards being more digital, even among the so-called traditional industries. But the current situation has accelerated that trend. And I think more and more industries will look at how do you actually develop a digital strategy? How do you get closer to customers? Which is going to be an area which is a sweet spot today. So if I look at our revenues, and I'm sure the industry is somewhere close there, we have 40+% of our revenues is digital. So that's another big play area. And lastly, I think in that order maybe is customer experience and collaboration tools, because more and more people are working remote. And how do you get a uniform experience? Number one. Number two, in terms of collaboration tools, I think people are working remotely. How do you create environments which enable this? How do you create a lot of collaboration and encourage that and monitor both productivity and progress? I think these are all big areas which are influenced by this, but it's also spreading to the so-called non-tech customers, and that's something which we are seeing as a secular trend, which will play out in the next, maybe if not few quarters, maybe few years, and that's something which is very positive because we play in all of these areas.
Okay. So first, a broad macro. If indeed global growth were to recover, and I think a lot of people, I mean, the debate is out there in the open. Morgan Stanley, I think day before yesterday, said that they expect V shape. Now we don't know what it will be, V, W, L, etc. But if it does pick up, I presume there was a study done which said that past cycles showed that there was a higher allocation across that value chain. Do you reckon that could happen if indeed growth picks up sooner?
So if I really look at it, so one is if you look at the trend for the past few years, and I'll come into the future, right? So I think ultimately, if I look at most industries, I think there has been a big allocations towards technology because I think people have realized that the digital disruption is very real. It is changing business models. So I do expect that that trend will continue as we see recovery. I think we will see more allocation towards technology, because truly speaking, I think uh, uh, given the current context, I think a lot of us and a lot of our customers are realizing that technology can solve some of these problems. So I think that's where I see that if the digital agenda is going to be accelerated as the economy revives. Number two is, I think people's plans around digital, I think, are going to increase in scope in terms of what they were envisioning before and what they're envisioning today. And that's something which I think is a longer term trend. In fact, I mean, you would have also known of some companies which were offline only, which have come up with some version of online in the last 2 months. So I think clearly that's just a indicator of things to come, that people's business models which were based on offline are moving to online, and that's a spend revival which we'll see as the economy comes back also.
And you briefly mentioned cloud. I think you are partnering with IBM to help clients migrate their core business applications to cloud. But is that a big driver? Because I do hear everybody talking about cloud as being uh, a parallel in all business activities here on.
So I think if we really look at cloud, I think what's happening is the benefits are, of course, a perfect scalability as well as ability to manage things like security much more easily, right? So I think there were concerns in the past around that, and I think people are actually working through those concerns and addressing those concerns. So if I really look at it, if, for example, one of the deals we did last year, which is one of the large deals, is about moving a lot of applications to the cloud with over a period of time, which will enable not only better customer experience in terms of issues around demand spikes, etc., but also it helps in terms of cost savings in the longer run. I think to me, though, that area around infrastructure on the cloud is something which is kind of a given. The next layer is about software as a service and other such cloud applications. Now, clearly, there I think the uptick has started, and there's going to be an implementation wave which we will potentially see, and I think that has always helped the IT services industry, because from an implementation perspective, I think there is going to be a lot of demand for those kind of services, and clearly only the large IT companies are in a position to make sure that those that demand is met. So overall, from a cloud perspective, my view is that we are just at the beginning of the journey, and it'll continue for a long while. And more, I think if we think about design statements, they are all cloud first, and that's really another pointer in that direction, in terms of where people are thinking and where our customers are going to invest in terms of their future.
So if I'm just trying to simplify this for myself and for my viewers, Manoj, uh, spends will increase across the tech space. So what will happen then? Would companies like you have a larger say within the same customers, and therefore more mining and more business activity for a company like you? Would that happen? How would this say benefit the tech Mahindra? I can loosely understand that everybody will spend more and it'll come across. But
Mhm.
can you
Mhm.
simplify it for us? What happens?
So I think there are three elements here, right? So one is, I would say that whatever is the current uh, IT stack is going to be
Mhm.
modernized. So that's one layer of spending. Now that modernization will definitely move in the direction of the cloud, and that's what I explained. The second one is that from a perspective of uh, the whole new spend is all going towards digital areas, and that is driven by imperatives around what people are seeing in the marketplace. So the combination of a legacy transformation, if you can call it that, and new spends going in digital, which is driven by business needs, combined with an economic revival, I think it'll mean that it's a bigger market for us, and I think we should see growth acceleration coming through. The last element I wanted to add more from a Tech Mahindra perspective is all of this is obviously presumes bandwidth, presumes network, presumes that there's a strong system connecting everything, right? So we are seeing 5G, which will come in probably towards the end of the year or into next year. I think that's going to be another big boost in terms of capabilities which can be offered across to our customers. And clearly, we have done a lot of investment, so that's one more area we are focusing on. And lastly, as you know, I think with sensors and IoT becoming a big thing today in terms of the capabilities they offer and the ability to automate and monitor real time, I think that's the other area of play. So when I put all of this together, that's adding up to a big upswing in terms of the addressable space as we come out of this current crisis and move into recovery, because customers are going to realign. That realignment will be helpful for someone like us.
You would reckon that the probability of uh, revenues moving up, showing a bump up, and then that being the new normal is higher. Uh, let's say in let's say in second half FY21 or maybe FY22 for sure.
So the probability of a new normal, I think, being higher, I think so. I do believe that as this thing comes out, I think there are going to be two new blocks of spending. So I think there is going to be an increased spend on the digital side, which will add to the possibility of growth in the future. The second thing
Hmm.
which I mentioned is, I think specifically for us, as we see 5G rollout, I think we are going to see a lot of associate spends around that, and that will all add another kicker. So I do believe that going into next year, for example, I think the whole industry will see some sort of an upswing. But again, these are you and I talking on this program, but reality is, I think there is still things to do. There are things which are evolving in the
Of course.
economy, and we'll have to see how it goes. Yeah.
Okay. Just one small macro question. An investor that I was speaking to 2 or 3 days back, I don't remember when, was telling me that when people will or companies will look at IT outsourcers as well, if I can loosely use that term, the size of those companies would matter, because I think they would want companies with a higher geographical reach and therefore a large IT vendor will be preferred compared to mid-size or small-size ones. Do you think that would happen?
So I think it has been an ongoing phenomena in terms of, I would say broadly, people going to, so larger customers going to larger vendors over a period of time, because they would want people with multi-country, multi-skill capability, and also have an end-to-end ownership. I think those are the two big benefits. As we go into this round, I think we will see elements of that. I think so. If I really look at segments around, some of the really smaller local vendors, I think we are seeing some trends there, which could lead us to believe that there will be some scope of that. And then there is the set of probably mid-tier and large vendors. I think that's an interesting one. I think we'll have to wait and watch in terms of people will go for specific capabilities or vendor consolidation. In the past, I think we have seen that vendor consolidation has won out in the end, because I think customers, as they look at combination of capability to drive initiatives as well as ability to transform on the operational front, I think the larger vendors have a better capability set, generally speaking, because of whatever you said.
Okay. Okay. Having established that there is a higher probability of this to happen, let's talk about two or three Tech Mahindra specific questions before we wrap up. First, do you reckon that? Okay, let me ask you theoretically, what percentage of your employees could be permanent work from home? I mean, is that something that you are aiming for as well as a company? And realistically, what percentage could be that?
So I think, see, we were always optionally work from home 10%, which obviously we never reached that number, because I think people are were more tuned to work from office. But I think the current environment, I think what we have seen is that the ability of teams to deliver in a remote working environment at almost the same productivity, I think that's been the key feature here. And that's why I think we have said that we do envisage that our baseline will be 25 to 30% work from home, and which would mean that probably, if I look at globally, we have what, 120,000 employees. So maybe about 30,000 employees could potentially work from home. And that's something which will lead to benefits in terms of, obviously from a company perspective, it will lead to some cost benefits, but also from an employee perspective, travel and some of those associated time which is lost, and which is a big challenge in many of the cities today. I think that will be a better experience, and we would probably be able to attract a segment of workforce which does
Yeah.
not want to work from home. So I think we'll have to see how it goes, but that's the stated intent, and we are trying to work towards that.
So you would actually, you would reckon that in 2, 3 years' time, and maybe I'm just trying to guess, 25-30% of your workforce could actually move permanently work from home.
Yeah, that's our goal. Of course, we'll have to work through with customers. We'll have to, because the government regulations are in a certain place right now, and so on and so forth. So we'll have to work through those. But I think what this current situation has given us a confidence that that's a manageable number from a
All right.
ability and a capability to do it, right? So
Just wondering though, offshoot of the question, this makes opening up of centers of operations in a particular area almost redundant, right? Not really redundant, but less important. You could very well operate a center in a small city and lower costs, and still have some very good talent across the country or across the world working with higher concentration on that center. That center being the nodal point of sorts.
So I think there are many possibilities. One of them is that. The second one is, of course, from my perspective, if I look at it, there is this growing emergence of what is called the gig economy, right? Which in effect is about people contributing remotely and trying to make something happen. But that's a very big, different topic. I don't want to get into it. But
Sure.
clearly, a lot of possibilities around once we start getting more familiar with this model. How will it work, and what are the interesting possibilities? It could be that you are location independent in a way, right? So So then, are there segments of the workforce who would prefer to work from home in addition for more flexibility? I mean, those are the kind of interesting questions which come up in terms of the future of work. So, but that's a whole different topic, as I
Yeah,
mentioned.
agree. It's a long one. Okay, but just
Yeah.
wondering, you mentioned that it could also mean a better costs for you as a company. Are you looking at a reset of the cost curve as it stood pre-COVID? Could be post-COVID?
So I think from a cost curve perspective, really we are focusing on three things, right? So one is I think with remote working, whether you are in the client location, whether you are in an on-site factory or an offshore factory, it does not matter. So I think from a cost curve perspective, we believe this will lead to an increase in offshoring over a period of time, which will help the cost base. The second is from a perspective of some of these productivity tools, etc. I think we are going to use more and more of them, because as we moved into remote working, I think we have put together a integrated command and control dashboard, which measures a lot of things which are happening in the project, and that is giving us comfort around how to manage projects remotely, and that will help us fine tune some elements of the operation in terms of productivity. That's going to change. And thirdly, I think obviously more from a short term perspective, given its Q1 has been a little bit of a muted quarter in terms of revenue decline. So I think we are operating at, of course, very lower levels, much lower levels of utilization, which will correct over a period of time based on demand uptick, etc. And as we build that up, I think the service lines which will emerge, which will be very, very different, and that's another element of the cost curve. So the baseline cost, I would say, would probably be a better outcome over if I look at it 4 quarters from now. That's what we expect.
Okay. Last question, and I think a lot of global reports are citing that how there could be a shift from an investor's perspective, not a shift really, but an enhancement of the investor preference for Indian IT because of the higher ESG scores. And I think all of you, without exception, or maybe there could be an exception here or there, have fairly high ESG scores as well. When you talk to global money managers, do they cite this as one big reason, in addition to many others, company-specific reasons, that they are inclined to look towards companies such as yours? Does that come up in conversations?
So I think it's interesting you ask that, because a lot of funds today have ESG analysts, which who have visited, who have interacted with us, and of course, this particular industry is ideally suited for them, because I think from a overall governance and perspective, I think Indian IT has always been a favorite in terms of many of the investors. If I look at sustainability, for example, in our case, we are in the DJSI. We are one of the, I think, three firms from India in the DJSI, and we are committed to sustainability. And then from an environmental perspective, I think clearly a lot of effort is going in terms of going to more cleaner sources of energy, creating work environment, and energy-friendly buildings. When I put all of this together, I think we are seeing a heightened interest. We are seeing more focus on that in terms of investors asking questions around what are our initiatives around diversity, for example, is another theme which we have seen come up. So many of these elements were probably have come up in the last 2 or 3 years, and they're taking forefront today. So in that sense, I think the industry will attract more investment interest because of the high kind of bar on ESG today. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, wish you all of the best for all of that and more. And thanks so much for giving us some glimpses into what the future tech spends could hold for IT as large.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Pleasure was ours. And viewers, thanks for tuning in to this broadcast of The Talking.